Wonderful. Wonderful, David Rothenberg. Welcome, herzlich willkommen zu diesem Panel on good vibrations. You all got them, we all got them. Music, sound and nature. My name is Christoph Mauch and I'm the director of the Rachel Carson Center for Environment and Society at Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich. And it's a great pleasure to have four wonderful panelists and performers here with us today. And I'd like to thank them for coming. I'd like to thank the staff of Beatopia who helped us, especially Annalisa Dieter. And I realized that what's happening here, I mean, you just noticed, here comes the acoustics and recorded, and David playing live. And we'll also have visuals. I think this is the most challenging job that they've had. That's what they just said. So I want to thank them all. And I need to thank my own center for sponsoring this event, the Rachel Carson Center. So join me in thanking everybody. In a way, David has already introduced himself. He's an outstanding jazz musician, but he's more than that, an author, composer, and a professor of philosophy at the New Jersey Institute of Technology. I will introduce everybody just very briefly and in the order of the opening statements that you'll hear in a second. Next to David is Dr. Daniela Samler, who comes from the Max Planck Institute. Actually, I just learned that this existed since 10 years. Fascinating Max Planck Institute for empirical aesthetics. Empirical aesthetics, that's exactly what she does. She's interested in, she's a natural scientist who is interested in neuroscience. So in what happens in your brain when we listen to, that's what they do at that center, what happens in our brain when we listen to poetry, when we listen to language, when we listen to music. Next to Daniela, Professor Samler is Professor Ulrich. And many of you know him. He was a president here in Bavaria of the University of Music in Nuremberg. And he's obviously a musicologist. But I think it's no exaggeration to say he knows as much about cacadus and seahorses and dancing seahorses as he knows about music theory. And he knows a lot about music theory. So he's not just a musicologist, he's probably something like a zoologicologist or a music-zoologist. And it's exciting to have him here. And next to, am I blocking the view? Next to Martin Ulrich is Dr. Franziska Schrack, who is just until recently a member of our institute here in Munich, but she has moved to Cambridge University. She's a postdoc there, and she is a political scientist who works on the relationship between sound and political movements. So we're all interested in what makes us move. How does sound make us move? I mean, we just realized, David, like in every jazz, it seems like jazz concerts always start very slowly, and then they move more and more, and then they make us move somehow. Somehow our brain seems to move us somehow. We are also moved to political action. And so you've got humanities scholars, social scientists, and natural scientists, and a performer who are discussing exactly that. My role is that of moderator, even though I don't want to be moderating in the narrow sense. I hope that there's not too much harmony and that there's controversy. And I hope that, my role is really that, because it's a music panel, I'm in charge of the rhythm and they are in charge of the tunes. And so we'll start. Everybody has prepared a statement, the opening statement, and we'll start again with David.
Thank you, Christoph. So, any musician can learn so much from animals. Birds, whales, bugs, all kinds of creatures, slime molds, they have senses of rhythm, music, beauty, and art that we can tap into. I just showed you how you might play live with nightingales. I spent a lot of time doing that. They leave space for you to join in. The more time you do it, the more you learn their kind of aesthetics, what music makes sense to them. Sedge warblers have this amazing rhythmic ability. There I just took the rhythm of this bird and tapped it into and turned all of its rhythms into different sounds, drum sounds, bass sounds, and little synthesizer sounds in the background. Sometimes if you slow down these birds, you can learn interesting things. Like there's a common bird where I live in eastern North America called the veery. It sounds like this. I think this bird, Veery, is named after this sound. What's amazing is when you slow it down and bring the pitch down, it actually sounds like this. Like, this is one of the best examples of a bird just making sounds that you have to think of it's like music. It has a shape, a form, a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it has to be performed a certain way for the bird to get what it's actually meaning. You have a related bird, they look almost the same. The hermit thrush song, maybe more famous, sounds like this at its regular speed. Every phrase is at a different pitch, a different place. Slow that down like half speed, it sounds like this. That's still the regular speed. There we go. The human sense is starting to be able to tap into this. Birds they hear 5 times faster than we do, which means they can discriminate tiny differences we're going to miss. So sometimes it helps to slow them down. And if you slow it down like one more time, as a musician, as a jazz musician, the easiest way to understand it is try and join in. I'm only going to join in for 1 minute now, staying within my 3 minutes. So, like 1/4 speed.
Okay, music, and I will argue particularly rhythm, is in our human nature. And groovy beats like the ones that you will hear in a second just simply make us move. So please. Now, this peculiar urge that probably some of you also had is actually found in every culture on that earth. But it's striking that it's not really frequently found in other animals. So we believe that this special ability to sense the beat and to derive pleasure from that is tied to a specific brain structure you need for doing that. And I will put to discussion today that this ability or these abilities to sense the beat and to derive pleasure from that give music actually a different function in humans than in animals. So it has a social function to create bonds between individuals. We were all synchronizing to the same beat, so it creates bonds between caretakers and infants. It unites people. It moves people. It signals coalition. So when we are dancing to the same music, we are kind of forming a group that represents that we are the group now that is involved in doing the thing together. So in short, music moves us, coordinates us, and bonds us. That's the point I want to make today.
from the point of view, is this going? I can use this. From the point of view of music history, musicology, music is a cultural practice that humans actually share with many other animals. Long ago in our evolutionary history, we might even have conceived our own music and maybe our spoken language by imitating animal sounds. And on this slide, you see some prominent examples for animals, in this case birds, in Western music history. On the left, Baroque music theorist Athanasius Kircher has tried to translate birdsong in musical notation in 1650. Right above, you see an album of human music for songbirds from the early 18th century. And right below, we see a picture of Mozart's dear friend and collaborator Emanuel Schikaneder, who wrote the textbook for Die Zauberflöte. Schikaneder himself played the character of Papageno in the premiere of the Zauberflöte. And while Papageno is described as a bird hunter in the text, his costume shows him here as a half bird-like creature himself. And yet the mainstream of Western music research and music aesthetics tends to exclude animals from the concept of music. And this exclusion, I think, builds on fundamental dichotomies that reach far beyond the realm of music. Culture versus nature, human mind versus animal instinct, man versus animal. But if music, in the words of famous avant-garde composer Edgar Varèse, is just organized sound, is it always humanly organized sound, as ethnomusicologist John Blacking has argued? I think this wonderful festival here gives us rich examples that we should not follow Blacking and many other Western music researchers in excluding animals from music. Musicians, as for example Hollis Taylor, Emily Doolittle, in this festival Dominic Eulberg, Cosmo Sheldrake, David Rothenberg, show us that music making can be an interspecies collaboration. And such more than human musics are beautiful, and they are blurring the boundaries between nature and culture. They remind us of the deeply rooted anthropocentrism in our Western society, our fixation on seeing the world always from a human perspective. And this anthropocentrism has led to all the catastrophic ecological problems of today, actually. So animal music is aesthetic pleasure for our listening sense, as David has just demonstrated here so beautifully on stage. And at the same time, it is a powerful way to remind us that we have to consider the interests of animals if we want to stop the destruction of our biosphere. Thank you.
Okay, so I want to tell a story. The story is shared by the Inuit people in Alaska and is about a woman called Earth. Earth sits by the coast and listens to all the natural voices around her. And then Earth begins to sing. What does it actually mean when Earth sings? It can mean that in addition to all the animal songs that we've so far heard, also natural surroundings are singing. And it's true, every song that we hear changes depending on the environment or the stuff it goes through. So it changes in air, it changes in water. And worms, for example, can notice these changes underground and hear vibrations. And once this stuff, this material changes, its sounds change too. And today with climate change, these changes happen much faster. So for example, oceans today are warmer, which speeds up the sound, and that confuses animals like whales who rely on echolocation. So whales lose contact and die earlier, and their songs are supposed to remind us of this loss. But can we also hear material singing? Let us try. What we heard was just a piece of a sound installation by composer John Luther Adams. And what it does is it records various weather phenomena or earthquakes across Alaska and then translates them into sound in a museum. So when we're in the museum, we can actually hear materials changing or singing. And this song is quite special, I think, because it also allows us to connect to these events that happen all the way out there and seem so far away. And they all of a sudden become kind of like an intimate part of us. And this intimacy happens because we hear these changes, these earthquakes, these glacier sounds in the moment happening at that specific time. We cannot really predict them, but we participate in them. And that happens quite automatically because sound affects us even without us even trying. It's like it moves our body automatically, which means that when natural sounds change, we change. And when natural sounds or materials are lost, like glaciers, we feel this loss. And it reminds us of the general loss of biodiversity that we have today. So maybe we don't have to try so hard to react to climate change. Maybe we need to remember that we are already reacting to the changing songs of the earth. And maybe we need to bring our own songs more in tune with them.
Wonderful statements, and they all do speak to each other. Now, I have a super quick question ahead of all the others about David, because I think I think everybody. I mean, I've heard you a few times before, but I never had a chance to ask you what triggered you to interpret or to deal in this way with the musicality of non-human species.
I think it started by wandering around as a kid in the forest and hearing sounds and getting interested in what might be interesting about them. But also when I was pretty young, I started to hear about some of the few musicians who did things like this. And one was a jazz saxophonist named Paul Winter. He lived pretty close to me. And this guy was famous for playing with wolves and whales and eagles. And so I got to meet him when I was a young teenager. And thought like, maybe I could do that. But I didn't for decades. I did nothing of the kind. I came back to it when I met R. Murray Schafer, the Canadian composer, who also put on orchestral pieces in the wilderness. And for his 60th birthday, there was a big conference in Canada. And there, all these people came, and it seemed like there was a small but dedicated community of people who cared about this. And then I kind of wanted to be part of it and then went back into it.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful story. I'm wondering, I think there's a certain, difference between the way that Daniela and David are looking at the relationship between humans and animals. It seems that for David and also, I think for Franziska, nature has songs. Nature has music, is that right? And there's, at the same time, Daniela might say, well, there's a big distance between humans and animals. So birds don't have rhythms, or other mammals except for humans don't have rhythms. Is that so? So maybe the two of you can speak to that. I mean, I could ask it more pointedly.
I mean, I would say that it's a conceit among scientists that animals can't follow a regular beat, and it's kind of interesting because usually science is a very highly developed form of knowledge, and yet dancing to a beat is kind of basic, and so you don't always imagine scientists like in the clubs or like dancing all the time, but of course they do. But that being said, of course animals follow all kinds of rhythms. Like the sedge warbler I showed before, the lyrebird you're going to hear a little bit later. And it's just that our sense of rhythm, particularly scientists' idea of what rhythm is rather limited, in that even most human music doesn't follow a steady beat. But of course, there's plenty of animals that do follow steady beats. And, I think some scientists wrote a paper on one parrot named Snowball. They thought was really unique that it could follow a steady beat. But anybody who spends time with any big parrots, they all follow beats. They got conned by this. They got overemphasized because they had some data they could get, so they went deep into this one bird. Mm-hmm. But that being said, it's true that you can't get chimpanzees to dance or follow like music that humans can easily relate to, and yet they're so similar to us. So there is something interesting, that's different in our brains to our very close relatives. That is worth investigating. But I think that you should be careful when you say animals don't follow rhythms, because they follow so many interesting rhythms. Like even 17-year cicadas, these insects, they only come out once every 17 years. And then it's silence. They're underground waiting. They're counting. They count. And they know when to come out 17 years. Because somewhere in their very small bodies and nervous system, they register the 17 changes of temperature that they know to come up. That's a rhythm. It's one of the longest beats in the animal world. And it's pretty regular. It's just hard for us to dance to it.
Mm-hmm. So
there are so many things to reply to. First thing, this snowball kakadu. It was really like in our scientific world, he is like a hero because he made us aware that animals can do it, specific animals. And the interesting thing in Snowball is, or in these vocally imitating birds, is that they have a similar brain structure to humans. It's surprising because they are quite remote evolutionarily from humans, but they do have a similar brain structure, like this audio-motor coupling and this learning by listening and motorically imitating. And that's a hypothesis that is out there explaining why this particular species can do it. Monkeys, on the other hand, our closer relatives, they don't have this brain structure. They don't have this audio-motor coupling. They do have other things. So monkeys, for example, they can synchronize quite well to visual rhythms. So they are not auditory, but visual synchronizers in a way. So yes, you're right. I mean, animals can synchronize, just not all of them synchronize to sound, which is, well, what we do music with sounds. So I also fully agree when you played these nightingales, slowed down, it really starts to sound musical. And there I think we have a challenge for us scientists to think about how we study animal music. I mean, if we just play ABBA to what's, let's say, a sea lion, what's the relevance for a sea lion to synchronize with ABBA? I mean, we have to come up with paradigms where the animal, and also contexts where the animal sees the relevance of joining in. And I think that's challenging. But there are people who are trying hard to really get to the bottom. So we don't exclude that animals are musical, so it's not like a all or nothing thing. I think that there are abilities in animals that we just have to discover and to see whether it's a quantitative or a qualitative difference between humans and animals. So I stop here.
Well, then of course we've heard about cows that give more milk when they hear certain types of, is that true?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by all this, and I'm wondering what Darwin would say because you just pointed out the difference between monkeys and humans. Maybe you can speak to that a little.
I think Darwin actually was super surprised, and he had a really big problem in his whole evolutionary theory that man all of a sudden showed music and animals didn't. But he still had the idea that from mating rituals, from attracting females, that's the reason why animals sing, and that developed or evolved gradually into human music.
Wonderful. I mean, it looked like, Martin, you wanted to add something, so I won't ask you a question, I just want you to add.
Yeah, thank you so much, because I think this scientific paradigm that the null hypothesis is that animals don't have music from a scientific point of view is derived from a very romantic concept of an autonomous music and very cultural construction. So I'm glad that you mentioned all those species who actually entrain, and I think we often in the last years have encountered this like black swan problem that we think, okay, all swans are white because we are here and we see white swans, we see them out there. And then suddenly we come to Australia for the first time, and there's the black swan. And there is this one chimpanzee who can keep the beat drumming. And he's there in this boring lab and is recorded by chance. And there are so many phenomena out there we just haven't encountered yet, I would be very careful to state that animals don't have certain musical abilities.
Well, I thought it's very interesting, Martin, when you told us that we've not looked so much at animals in music, and we've overlooked them, so we've excluded them. And so it's a question for both of you, really. What does exclusion of nature mean to the two of you? I mean, we learned in the panel with Ed Young before and Michael John Gorman that it's really, we lose something if we don't, we're taking away, in part because of our own intervention in nature, we're taking away from what animals can sense. But also, I mean, this whole question of exclusion seems to be dangerous. Maybe breaking down the barrier between nature and culture would be important.
May I just briefly? Yes, and maybe it's something like the last barrier we still have in Western culture. I mean, Western music has been so exclusive, and it has excluded classes, women, non-European people, and so on. And we have learned to be more inclusive. But there seems to be this last frontier of this concept of music as a culture, and this is this nature culture barrier. I'm very much with Donna Haraway, who speaks of nature culture in one word, because the contact zone in which animals and humans meet, as you just demonstrated, David, is the really fascinating thing from an aesthetical point of view. So maybe it's time to break down this last barrier, and maybe Biotopia is the ideal place to do that.
Yeah, definitely. I should tell you that when I first met Martin, it was 17 years ago. I was convener of a conference on animals in history. And at that time, the Frankfurter Allgemeine said, this is the weirdest thing. They are looking at animals in history. I mean, humans have history, animals don't have history. So today people are doing this, but I can only agree that we've started to break down this barrier in the discipline of history, and we should break it down way beyond that. Way beyond that, Franziska.
Way beyond, yeah. I think that would be kind of my intervention or point, that we're not just excluding animals, but we're also including all the other stuff that we usually just call natural surroundings. But all of these natural surroundings or materials in nature are also making sound. And sometimes we can't even hear those sounds, right? They all these vibrations that exist in nature, but also in this room, that make us feel something, that change our mood, even if we don't hear them. And I just think it's interesting to think more about them, and to think about how does our idea of the world change when we understand these connections a bit better. And I think that is why I think sound art can be so interesting, like pieces that I tried to show earlier, because they are trying to actually expand this idea of music and to include these sounds that we otherwise can't even identify or don't notice into music. And it's to me, it's like a way to make them more approachable and actually audible to us.
Well, you're a political scientist. Is there something like politics of sound? I mean, where's the political dimension?
Well, if you ask my colleagues, there's not. At least I always need to make the point that there should be.
Yeah. So are we ready to move to, or would you like to?
Yeah, you get.
Actually, maybe I should provoke you more.
You get another musical example now, and it kind of begins already with a provocation, because I'm going to talk about this very unique bird song, and then you're going to hear me playing along with it. So I'm explaining how it works first. So this is the song of the Albert's lyrebird in Australia. That's Lyre. He's not against telling the truth, but his tail is shaped like the lyre, the ancient Greek instrument. Now, this is a bird that loves to dance. He definitely moves. And he has this very complicated, structured song. It's like 4 minutes. You can hear the whole thing. He starts with a territorial call, singing to the other males, going like, whip, 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 whip. Okay, and then the other ones might respond a little. Then they stop. Then he goes across this song, all based on imitations of other species that are around. But he's singing it in the winter. No other bird is singing. He's like kind of concoct spring, you know? And he doesn't sing all their songs. He's very aesthetically minded, something Darwin was interested in. He's definitely worth study by the Institute of Empirical Aesthetics in Frankfurt. Should go into this, because this bird picks the noisiest sounds from other birds, like and just copies them and puts them together, always in a slightly different order. He's like improvising. He even imitates the sound of flapping his wings. He goes, he could flap his wings, but he doesn't. He's making the sound of it. Okay, and then, then he stops and he makes it, then he switches to another sound, which is called gronking by the scientists who study this. And it sounds like you're tuning in a radio, like from outer space, like, and then he flips his feathers over his head and he jumps up on vines that are hanging down on both sides. He's found the right place in advance. He knows, then he shakes the tree and he goes like, boo, 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 boo. And then he does it all over again. He starts again. And so I went to play along live with this bird because I didn't believe it was real. You know, Olivier Messiaen went out to transcribe the lyrebirds and work them into his music. And this is like a composition. It's a whole work of music. It's got rhythm, form, structure, energy, silence, sound, noise, dance. And, you know, why? Why does it even exist? Well, we're not going to answer that question now. We're just going to play along with it.
totally fascinating.
Now we all do it together.
Yeah. I didn't know about the lyrebird, but I remember you've also worked on the bowerbird. So birds have not just the ability to sing, but also the bowerbird puts things of the same color together and attracts the other gender, the other sex, and so. It's totally beautiful. In our eyes, we find it absolutely beautiful. Maybe it's the Australian birds that do this. They're both from Australia. Birds seem to be artists, and I'd like to ask that question to all four of you. If somebody says, "Are birds artists or animals artists?" how would you respond? But before that, I have a question for David about his interaction. I mean, you are interacting with the bird here. But the bird can't make a move because the bird is recorded in this case. But if this happens live, if you go to a park and you play with the bird, can you tell us something about, is there an exchange between you and the bird?
The reason I want to do this live is to answer the first questions you had. Like, what's really going on here? What is the aesthetic that's happening? And as a musician, particularly if you're playing music, I think all music, we're playing music, we're listening to music, we don't understand it. Music theorists don't understand music, musicologists don't. We don't get it. It's like, we don't know why it matters so much for us. No matter how much study goes on, we can't figure out why we follow this beat. Two important Darwin quotes here. Darwin said, "The peacock's tail," and that really makes me sick. He wrote that in a letter to one of his colleagues because he if you have survival of the fittest, this is not a very fit thing to have evolved. You drag this heavy tail around. Like, what uselessness. That's when he came up with the theory of sexual selection, that some things are just selected for over the generations just because, one sex likes it. Often we think it's the males that have all these extravagant displays, but not only all the time. The females just liked peacocks more and more that had too much of a tail, too big feathers, and so then they could watch these males evolve into something that could barely move, and they could say, okay. And the same with bird songs. And Darwin also said in The Descent of Man, where sexual selection as an idea is introduced, he says, birds have a natural aesthetic sense. They appreciate beauty. That is why they've evolved beautiful feathers, beautiful songs, and bowerbirds are one species that evolved the need to make art. They don't just put some blue stuff in one place. They make these sculptures, each species totally different designs, and they don't even have to learn this. It's not like learning. They have this innate aesthetic, like, this is the one I have to make. And like human artists, some of them steal things from each other. And then this shows that sometimes, at least, evolution can break through practicality and suggest the need for just weird, crazy stuff can get through. And as a musician who likes to improvise and interact in unusual situations, I just want to go play with these birds. And when I went to play with lyrebirds, they have to finish their performance. They're not so sure what this other sound is. They change what they're doing a little bit, said the lyrebird experts. But they like nightingales, don't stop. They keep performing. You can't really spook them once they begin. Some animals aren't so pleased you're doing this, and then I'll go find some other ones. I won't keep harassing them.
Yeah. So would any of you like to answer the question about whether birds are artists in your opinion?
Well, I think it connects a bit to what you are saying. There is this experiment in psychology that you have little triangles move on the screen, and it starts to us, it's the simile illusion. So it starts to us looking like the bigger triangle is chasing the smaller triangle. And so we humans tend to interpret things that we see in terms of social or in terms of maybe artistic, in terms of being creative. And the question is, and we have to be careful here, is whether it's our brain that interprets something into what we are hearing, or whether it is something that the animals do, well, to be creative, to do something artistic. And I think that's something that's difficult to tease apart.
Does any of you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I can. I want to say a fault sort of in between also, because the short answer would also for me be yes, they are artists, but also describing them as art artists is also something that we do, right? I think it's also, it can be at sometimes more interesting to think that there are different species or even materialities that have modes of expression, and then sometimes we identify them as song or as beautiful, but they are multiple. And so sort of like thinking more about this multiplicity that's out there is sort of what I think can be interesting.
I think it depends from where we derive this question, because if we have this picture of the musician, the composer, the author, the aesthetic subject, then we have a paradigm where maybe many animals don't fit, but if we instead choose what you could call a relational aesthetic, where aesthetic processes happen as a collaboration between very heterogeneous actors, then all of a sudden many species have music and arts and interspecies music. I mean, David here plays to us with recorded sounds, but David, you have done so many live jam sessions with animals out there in the field, and then interspecies music is a real possibility. If we don't think of art and music as something which is just there, the work, or even a canon of works, but as a performative process, where in between the relations, the really beautiful things happen.
I come from the Rachel Carson Center, and probably all of you know the famous book by Rachel Carson, Silent Spring. And it starts like a novel. She's a biologist. It starts like a novel, and it's haunting. It's a beautiful landscape and no sound. And that's so terrifying. There's silence. So I'd like you all to tell us a little bit about, there's the importance of silence, but also I'm intrigued because in our title we've got music and sound. Does it matter? What's the difference for you? What's the difference, for a neuroscientist, for instance, for any of you, between music and sound? And so I'm asking a challenging question. Pick any of the questions. What's the difference between music and sound? And how and why might silence be important? Anybody should go first.
Well, I can try to start. I think the question of, or the issue of silence, the concept of silence is actually a very interesting one, especially because it has changed sort of what it means to us. Like silence, say, even in the Romantic eras, a silent nature was still described and perceived as something positive, because not because there weren't any sounds, but because it was a sort of a difference to the noisy industries that were coming up and things like that. So that was sort of what silence in nature was then. And now, as you described, especially with someone like Rachel Carson, who goes out and says, okay, yeah, there aren't any birds anymore. Silence in nature has become terrifying to us. And it is, in like a larger sense, I think it has become a sign of this loss of biodiversity that we're facing today in the era of climate change. So I think that's an interesting aspect to think about when it comes to silence. But also overall, when I think about the example of Rachel Carson, I think it's interesting that here we have this immediate link between caring for biodiversity and song or sound. Like this link is there right at the beginning of the environmental movement, where she takes song as like an indication. She's saying, this is what I noticed first. And then her answer was, we don't have birds or songs anymore because we use specific pesticides, and the pesticides kill birds. But the first connection is the song, and I think that is something that we can push further, as in like, okay, how does it change when we approach the world from this like sonic perspective?
You know, as a historian, I'm interested in, and you don't have to answer it. I will, but I want to think about it more. I always thought that, at least in late Romanticism, you've got, for instance, the famous, Germans know it as klappert die Mühle am rauschenden Bach. So that's very loud. The mill is klappering. You hear the water run down. We call it romantic. And you're saying that the Romantics liked silence and we don't like it anymore?
I'm just saying that describing nature as silent, I think, has changed meaning a little bit. I'm not saying that nature was ever silent, or that even the Romantic poets weren't describing like say, sounds in nature. They were always contrasted to like the big noises in the city. I'm saying that this meaning of like a silent nature, I think, has changed a little bit from something that was more positive and included some like minor sounds still, but were peaceful, to like this lack or absence that now is kind of terrifying to us. So it's more about the meaning.
In my opening statement, I always sympathized with this definition: music is organized sound. So there is no categorical difference, but it's, in the end, it's a question of politics, of power. Who is allowed to organize the sound? The conductor in the concert hall, or the birds out there in the dawn chorus? So I think if we lose this, if we lose animals for music, we lose biodiversity and we lose our biosphere. And this, I think, is the importance of animal music, the actual political importance of it.
I think the definition of music as organized sound is a terrible definition. I mean, that's what I heard in college. Like, okay, that's supposed to open it up. You know, it's music if someone tells you it is. Like, consider this as music. How about this? Try this out as music. You pick up the electric guitar, put it in front of the amplifier, it feeds back. It's music. Consider this as music. Someone just decides. And so all the human languages that said like bird songs, birds making songs, they were all trying to tell us that this is music. And they had a good point, because like, you know, these birds have been singing these songs for millions of years. Like, we know that they work. You know, when people ask me, you really think birds make music? I say, I know birds make music. I don't know if people do. We can't seem to make up our mind. We're always changing. Maybe we like this, we dislike this, and then we try and free ourselves from our likes and dislikes. But I sense that the animal world, the plant world, nature is full of music. It's full of sound that you can consider as music, because take it as something beautiful, necessary, structured, rhythmic, passionate. Consider it as that, and you'll find the world around you is that much more valuable. Like, it's a good thing to do.
Well, I can go in two directions now. So the first thing, why are we so sure that birdsong is music? Why can't it be speech? Are they maybe just chatting?
I mean, the many human languages that have bird calls and bird songs, even though scientists would say this distinction is too simple, so many human languages recognize this. So for thousands of years, people thought that, okay, these sounds are closer to song and these sounds are closer to speech. And the ones closer to speech seem to have specific meanings, like, hey, I'm hungry, or watch out, a predator is overhead. I mean, it's not just our scientific culture, but many cultures, most recognized for some reason that these other sounds, people heard it as something more musical, because they thought that there was some meaning inherent in the performance that you wouldn't translate into saying, this is what it means, you know. I think it's something like that, although it's not so defined. And I think when we talk about a bird song, it's something that's more a performance rather than the conversation. Like humpback whales also have songs because individuals are performing these long for 20 minutes over and over again for 20 hours of that. And then, you know, killer whales, orcas, dolphins, belugas talk to each other. They're making more social sounds. So people generally don't call those songs. And so I think that, of course, you know, these are hazy definitions, and one can say, this is just human culture. Let's find out what the animals are really doing. But I think this concept of music, as much as any other human concept, could apply to humans or animals equally. And yes, it's hard to define, but we also know it's really important.
I agree that it's rather a continuum between speech and music.
Well, I could see that we have to finish very soon. The signal came, so we have about 2 or 3 minutes left. But I'm those of you who know me know that I'm totally into hope as a concept, and I always want to end an evening like this, or a panel like this, with something more hopeful. Actually, I shouldn't call it hope. I should call it the relevance also. I mean, what can we take away? You're doing fascinating stuff. I mean, I think you're moving us in different ways to think about the interrelationship between humans and the not so human world. And I'm wondering, can you tell us from your disciplinary perspective, or from your experience, what we should take home tonight in terms of, you know, why is it relevant, or what how could we change, and should we be moved by, or how could we be moved by either doing what you're doing or doing something that we can do, even if we can't perform like David.
So maybe I can start. I mean, we saw in the example that I played at the beginning that music can unite people, can give us the feeling of togetherness. And that's why I enjoyed yesterday Dominic Eulberg's performance. I felt the togetherness in the room, and to see these nature images on screen is something that can hopefully make us move and bond with nature and to do something against what's going on.
Well, I can try to continue. I mean, I work on climate change and politics, so hope is a difficult concept for us. But I think, to me, like when I think currently about climate change, then I think about these visual representations, right? We all know these dramatic images, and we know the data, and we see the data in graphs. And I think to some extent, these visions have sort of reached a limit in affecting people because we see them all the time. And my starting point is sort of to think, well, what if we use sound or a sonic perspective as a point, like a different entry point to make us care about the planet, and then to change our actions, and to start, as I said earlier, by thinking about these connections that exist because sound travels between us, because it already connects us, even if we don't hear it, and connects us as humans, but it also connects us to animals, it connects us to the non-human nature. And if we sort of feel them changing and sense that our bodies are changing with them, do we end up with a different concept of like care, I guess.
I totally agree. And I would, from a musicological point of view, advise go out, listen to the next blackbird out there, and think about when you love it, when it's beautiful, then it deserves justice, and it deserves to be considered and to flourish.
Okay, so my final performance is going to be all about hope. Now I'm going to tell you what you're going to hear, so pay attention if you want to know. So in July, I was asked to do this program with little kids in the Rockefeller Preserve near New York City. And we're going to be listening to underwater pond sounds. And I said, when you listen to underwater pond sounds, sometimes nothing happens. You just have to wait. And maybe nothing happens. Maybe something starts to happen. They said, we can't wait because every event has limited time. And there's going to be little kids there. They have no patience. After 5 minutes, they're going to want to leave. I said, well, they're going to have to wait. So we did this, and I explained you're going to have to wait to hear things. And so after about 5-10 minutes, all the parents were ready to leave. And the kids were saying, no, we have to wait. Things are going to happen. And they all wanted to stay, and they wouldn't leave. And the parents had to listen to the next generation who wants to stay and take time and listen to what cannot be heard. And so after about an hour, all these sounds started coming. And they were regular beats. Regular rhythms were coming from the ponds made by plants in the midst of photosynthesis, and then insects. They start to make all this sound that was like a whole underwater orchestra. And in this recording that I'm going to play along with, you basically just hear that sound as it played, and I resonated a little bit to add some pitches that weren't there. That's the only effect I put on it. And in the background, in the faint background, you hear humans talking. These strange species are mumbling, while the animals and plants are making music much louder than the people. So here you go.
So we can't wait to hear this. But before we listen to this, to David the last time, I really, really want to thank the panelists for a most outstanding panel. You were infectious with your ideas and insights. And please join me in thanking Daniela, Franziska, Martin, and David.